IT. Now we are moving towards a very interesting and very unique session, which will discuss the different aspect of the One Health from different perspective. So for this, I would like to invite our esteemed chairpersons, Professor Y K Gupta as the chairperson. So Professor Y K Gupta is a former professor and head of Department of Pharmacology at AIMS Delhi, and he is a member of many of the committees and also the president of AIMS Jammu. Dr. R K Sawal. Dr. R K Sawal is director of the National Research Center on Camel at Bikaner, and he has a distinguished activities in the form of various research related to chemical studies, chemical and the chemical milk research with the Bikaner Middle College. It is my pleasure to invite Dr. Arvind Mathur, who is a former principal and controller of Dr. SN Middle College, Jodhpur, and he is a very distinguished leader, still active in many domains, especially the geriatric and the integrative medicine. I would like to invite Dr. Siddharth Srivastava, who is a professor of practice at IT Jodhpur, and he is looking after the different aspects of the medtech students and their career. There are two more people who are going to just join. They are coming from the ward, Dr. Gopal Vora. He is a professor of medicine, professor and head of medicine department at AIMS Jodhpur. So we are just waiting for him, but we can start. And I request the chairpersons to initiate the sessions with the talks which are on different aspect of the One Health. So I request Professor Y K Gupta to start the session.
नमस्कार to everybody and हमारे दोनों co-chair Dr. Sawal and Dr. Siddharth का हमारा नमस्ते and my regards to all the dignitaries in the conference hall and I know Dr. Hegde, Dr. Nagendra for many years now, particularly as I co-chair One Health program of Department of Science and Department of Biotechnology, of which Dr. Hegde is a wonderful coordinator. Dr. Hegde is not only a great scientist in himself, but also a wonderful, I would think, a compiler, coordinator, and also a person who puts everything in one perspective and give a new direction. तो हमारे वन हेल्थ प्रोग्राम में 20-21 इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं फ्रॉम डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ हेल्थ, बायोटेक्नोलॉजी इंस्टीट्यूट including All India Institute of Medical Sciences, the veterinary colleges, wildlife, biological sciences, the institution from Northeast particularly to the institutions in North and every part of the country represents. We know that today AMR, antimicrobial resistance, is also called as a silent pandemic. And one of the important preparedness for this silent pandemic is see what are the original causes. जब हम इसको देखते हैं, then we find that not only it is a human which is important, but it is entire concept, as Dr. Kotoch mentioned in the morning. In fact, he conceived this idea long back. Environment is one factor. Then when you say environment, means it is the aquatic, the zoonotic, the environment. So ये सारी चीजें बड़ी important है. Therefore, One Health concept is so important. How many diseases are prevalent in animal which can be transmitted to human and from human to animal and from aquatic to this? Linkage establishment between the animals and the human is very difficult. It's not so easy. Tuberculosis or maybe some avian flu, it is much. But when you look for the profile of diseases, then you have to look for the presence of the microbial organisms which are causative in animals, then method of transmission, the amount of transmission, and then the same organism with mutation or without mutation causing disease in human. And after that, सिर्फ इसको identification is not only important, and that's why One Health program is, what could be the best intervention which can inhibit this transmission, and what can be the best intervention which can prevent and treat this. We also look for the inappropriate disposal of antibiotics from pharmaceutical industry, the inappropriate disposal of drugs from pharmaceutical industry as well as from the hospital. And you know the famous incidence of number of deaths of vultures, disappearance of vulture to that extent from couple of areas in Northeast Asia and India and Pakistan and Bangladesh primarily, and which was attributed to administration of diclofenac in larger animals for pain killing, and also disposal of diclofenac as it was found in carcass of animals. उसके basis पे couple of drugs were banned. Oxytocin was banned because it was used in plants and consumed by animals. Oxytocin was consumed in animals and was also found to be having some effect on human. So what could be the residual effect? That is also important. And entire this thing is One Health. And how much effort One Health is? Somebody raised a question, very valid question. कि One Health का linkage establish करना is one thing, but then ultimately it is also important to educate public, creating awareness about One Health, which is almost negligible in India. And that is why this topic is very, very important, valid, and contemporary, and I would say futuristic. So the concept which Dr. Katoj has initiated maybe 10, 15 years back has gained more importance today. Important thing is, जो Dr. Katoj ने morning में कहा कि are we towing the toe? Are we just towing the name of given by the Western world? Perhaps I think that should never be the spirit, as he said. इसको हमको अपने देश के हिसाब से कौन से animals, कौन सा bacteria which can affect human life, which can affect a zoonotic life, or which can affect the environmental. I think that is important. So nobody can be better than Dr. Hegde, and who is spearheading this entire country's program. And of course, Dr. Taru gave, who is coordinator from the institution of ICMR. Thank you very much. With this note, I request Dr. Hegde to give his presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta, sir. Respected chairman, dignitaries of the dais, other attendees here. What I thought was, since Madam Dr. Taru Sharma has already mentioned about what has been going on with One Health, I thought I would provide some glimpse of why animals are important for us, not just for One Health, but also for our lives. So that going forward, why do we need to pay attention to the epidemiology of livestock disease, both for livestock health and production, as well as zoonotic disease? But mostly I'll focus on zoonotic disease. So acknowledgements first, I'd like to thank NAMS, Dr. Kuldeep Singh especially, the One Health Consortium and DBT BRIC. So there's a large number of organisms in the world, and the large majority is actually insects. And if you look at chordates, a very small proportion, out of which 25% are mammals, rest of them are other sorts of animals. But they're all important. And out of the mammals, only 32% are humans. rest are all other livestock. Actually, cattle and other livestock are the large proportion. Wild mammals are only about 1.5%. And if you look at the energy transfer, this is the classical food pyramid that you see in biology textbooks, even at high school. Energy being captured from the sun and going upwards. But actually, it's not that simple. It goes from one way to the other. There are several levels, different kinds of arrows flying everywhere. So it's not as simple as a simple, pyramid. And microbes do play an important part in this because bacteria, including cyanobacteria and other bacteria that help in production of energy, are attacked by viruses. In turn, their population goes down and the viruses cannot survive and their population goes up. So there is a flux everywhere. So microbes do play an important role in this energy transfer process, but they also cause. So it's estimated that there are about 1,500 pathogens that infect humans. And if you can see the number of bacterial and viral pathogens in the top and the bottom graphs here, there has been a tremendous increase in the number, mainly because of genomics, which is able to differentiate the different species of viruses and bacteria. And if you look at the history of pandemics caused by viruses mostly and bacteria as well, we've had this from time immemorial, various kinds of pandemics, and something that HIV is still ongoing. And many of them have occurred in the last 15, 20 years, mainly because we are able to identify them, we are able to speciate them, we are able to differentiate them. And equal number of them are bacteria and viruses. And many are zoonotic. Do we have evidence whether they are zoonotic? Yes, there have been 2 seminal works that have been published. I won't go into the others. In 2000, it was identified that 1,709 human pathogens at that time, they identified 49% were zoonotic, means they came from animals. They identified 156 emerging pathogens, of which 73% were zoonotic. And emerging pathogens are 3 times more likely to be zoonotic. There was another paper in 2008 where they looked at 60-year data, where they looked at 335 EIDs or emerging infectious diseases. Again, 60% of them were zoonotic, and almost 3/4 came from wildlife, not just domestic animals, but originally from wildlife. So this graph shows the same thing. If you look at zoonotic wildlife, which is in white in these bars, large proportion actually. And they are there everywhere. So much so that WHO, made a statement that we've been seeing a new infectious disease every year for the last more than 30 years. So what causes the spillover? And here comes the importance of the animals. It's not just microbes crossing the border and with a passport. It starts with us chasing the food. Agriculture started several thousands of years ago, but intensive agriculture is only about 100 to 200 years old, where we have started using agrochemicals and growing them in large scale, deforestation, etc. But our association with animals goes much, much farther. We have been domesticating animals for several thousand years, even including for food purposes, companionship, sports, etc. Of course, with all this, we sit at the top of the food chain. And that's where comes the problem. But we have to realize that we can't just, get away from animals. The animals, if somebody says that, okay, animals are taking away our food, just sit back and think for a moment. I'd like to make a point that 86% of what the livestock eats is not edible for us. Only 14% is what is common to us and them. So basically, they are utilizing something that is not edible for us and then converting themselves as food for us. In fact, 18 to 20% of our energy and 40% of our protein comes from livestock. So there's a lot of strength in rearing livestock. There's also weaknesses, food safety, etc. There's also a threat, and that's where the diseases come in. And indeed, the greatest burden of this threat falls on the 1 billion poor livestock keepers of the world, mostly around the equator. More than 1 in 7 livestock are infected every year. 2.3 billion human illnesses occur, and 1.7 million human deaths occur because of these zoonotic infections. So then what drives the spillover? As we can all agree, it's mainly anthropocentrism. We think humans are the center of everything. Okay? In fact, the time has come for us to change this. And the reason for all this spillover is multiple causes. We know this, I mean, including tourism. I may pick up some pathogen and I can mechanically transfer it to some other country. So I won't go into the details. I'll give you some glimpses as well. So the pathogen flow as the human-animal interface, if you look at this graph from 10,000 BCE versus 2000 CE, the pandemic graph has actually gone very steep, suddenly has gone very, very steep. I mean, this has also to do with identification of pathogens. But we should also acknowledge that we are also intensifying livestock production. So our contact with animals has also increased. And we live in a continuous flux between livestock, peri-domestic wildlife, and the wildlife. So there's always a chance for pathogen to come from wildlife to peri-domestic wildlife, to livestock, to humans, and there's always an interaction. And intensification of livestock production and other human-animal interface is important for One Health. So if you look at population urbanization, where increasing demand for milk or meat or animal products happens, intensification also causes increase in animal diseases because they are kept in close quarters, their feeding is very uniform, their genetics are very uniform, they become more susceptible to disease. And when that happens, there is always a chance that there is a spillover to human beings. And this is true even for AMR. Using, antimicrobials in humans, animals, and there's a transfer either ways. So this is very critical, where livestock production contributes to zoonotic diseases, not just our protein and energy. And you can also get these things from live markets, wildlife hunting, intensive wildlife farming, even zoos. Okay, so it's important that we understand that a lot of these diseases are ultimately coming from animals. And wild animals are no less important. Many infections are known to be ultimately coming from wild animals. And in fact, there was a 2-page note in one of the papers from Seema Patel from San Diego State University, stating that every member of kingdom Animalia is a potential vector for human pathogen. So I give some examples. H5N1 flu, which is being tied down to migratory birds, and it's been tracked down that the movement of these H5N1 N1 was mainly because of migratory birds. Cases of H1N1 pandemic influenza originally started in Mexico and then California, but this was a reassortment between avian, swine, and human viruses. And the problem with influenza is its reservoir are birds, and there are an estimated 20% of the birds that are migratory in nature. So out of the 10,000 bird species, about 20% are migratory in nature, and they can carry the flu viruses everywhere. Examples of West Nile virus coming from animals, Nipah coming from pigs, and monkeypox coming from animals. And there's a famous case of a Gambian rat, which was imported into US, and they found prairie dogs dying, and then it infected some humans in the US. SARS is another example, although the definitive hosts that carry definitive animal hosts are not very well known. Civet cats are thought to be the ones, MERS through camels. And we do not know if Ebola hemorrhagic fever, Zika, all these have any animal reservoirs. Dengue also, in fact. Human coronaviruses, we know they have origins mostly in bats and then transmitting into intermediate hosts. And bats, in fact, have a variety of viruses that can ultimately be transmitted to us. So ultimately, it's not enough that we focus only on the medical health or people. We have to have a proactive approach rather than, yeah, I'll wind up in a couple of minutes. So if you look at this, the spillover events in animals is these small bumps at the bottom, and then there's spillover into livestock and then into humans. But if you actually take this is what happens in a reactive approach. If you take a proactive approach and try to control this and detect this in animals, you will be reducing the red peak, which is what happens in humans. And ultimately, that is where One Health lies. So the benefits of controlling zoonosis, I will not go into the details, but there are very few studies which look at animals and the One Health approach and cost reduction. So I'd like to just point out the last bullet, which implies 85 billion losses could be averted by investing $25 billion. So 4 times more savings than what you spend. So where do we start? We have to start somewhere, and that is surveillance. And with that, we have to have prevalence studies. That's what exactly Madam was telling in the morning. Long-term solutions, we have to have surveillance, not just prospective epidemiology. We have to have crosstalks between various sectors, sharing of samples, isolate sequences, convergence, cross-validation of diagnostics, funding for something unknown. We don't know anything, and most people would not come forward to fund these things. Infrastructure development, HR development and networking, and regulatory facilitation for diagnostics, reference material, and our own risk groups, for example. So resources need to be maximized. We can't be blaming agriculture sector is doing this, veterinary sector is doing this, medical sector is doing this. We have to come together, put our resources together. This is actually the slides for Tracy McNamara, who was instrumental in identifying West Nile viral infection in Bronx Zoo and linked that to human infections in the US. And this graph shows the number of veterinarians in different parts of the country. Believe me, it's not just the medical community that is suffering from less number of doctors. Even veterinary doctors are less in number. So we have to work together in order to resource optimize. And collaboration is everything. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hegde.